It is one of the finest singles of the 80s, armed with a spirit of mystery and noir by a new wave band who were kept out of the #1 spot by a novelty single. The enduring story of a synth pop classic is told by the lead singer and the writer, next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you join Columbia House to get 12 CDs or 12 tapes for a penny, you are going to dig this channel. Just subscribe below right now so you never miss an episode of our daily features, and make sure to click the bell so you can see our interviews one-on-one, the greatest songs straight from the artist. Also, check us out on Patreon, our insider community for real fans. This is a can't-miss episode, I'll tell you what. More people on this planet should know who Midge Ure is. He's definitely one of the most underappreciated singer-songwriters and producers of the rock and roll era. You know, he helped revitalize a broken-up Ultravox. He also co-wrote and produced one of the most influential recordings of the entire 80s with Do They Know It's Christmas, the #1 smash from 1984. And that led to everything from We Are the World to Live Aid. We have a 2-part documentary on this if you want to see it on our channel. Midge Ure's name is actually James Ure, but he took his first name and did a phonetic reversal to Midge. And he came onto the scene in the 70s with several different bands, with the band Slick that included Bay City Rollers writers Bill Martin and Phil Coulter providing songs. Interestingly, in 1975, Midge Ure was said to turn down an offer to be the lead singer of the Sex Pistols, saying that he felt at the time that Malcolm McLaren had his priorities completely wrong, a position that he later changed. In early 76 with Slick, he achieved the #1 single on the UK singles chart with Forever and Ever. Later, Midge Ure went on to join former Sex Pistol Glenn Matlock in Rich Kids, a punk outfit.
So when you say you're a rich kid, well, I ain't kidding you.
And then Ure would form the band Visage with former Rich Kids bandmate Rusty Egan, with a peculiar lead singer Steve Strange, who amongst other compositions in the punk and new wave scene, released the equally peculiar and haunting single Fade to Grey. Great song. Then Ure would leave to join Thin Lizzy. He already knew Phil Lynott. Ure received co-writing credit for Get Outta Here on Thin Lizzy's LP Black Rose. So in mid-1978, Midge joined up to help Thin Lizzy finish a US tour when guitarist Gary Moore abruptly left. Midge would also play guitar on the songs Things Aren't Working Out,
Things ain't working out down at the farm.
and Dublin for the Lizzy album, although Ure would continue to collaborate with Phil as he would co-write Phil Lynott's biggest solo hit, Yellow Pearl. Midge would eventually leave to join Ultravox. Now this was in 1979. Midge had developed a close friendship with Billy Currie when the two were in Visage. And Currie was convinced by Rusty Egan to ask Midge in joining a revived Ultravox. They were no more as lead singer John Fox left to pursue a solo career, and guitarist Robin had quit the band. So in April '79, the band regrouped and Midge Ure became the singer-songwriter, guitarist, and second keyboardist. Ure has always been such a sensational multi-instrumentalist. The second iteration of Ultravox would become the classic lineup, with Billy Currie on keyboards, violin, Warren Cann on electronic drums, and Chris Cross on bass. Now remember, this was when Midge was on tour with Thin Lizzy. He spent the first half of 1979 on Lizzy's tour of the US. He still managed to tour with Ultravox, and he wrote many of the songs that would end up on their first album together. That album, titled Vienna, was recorded in 1980. Although technically it was the band's fourth album, it was the first with Midge Ure and with that lineup, and actually the first one in the band's history to chart at all. When it was first released, it was only moderately successful, but when the band released the title track Vienna, it changed everything. It not only became a massive hit, spending 4 weeks at #2 on the UK charts, it was actually the 5th biggest hit of the year, and decades later still moves the soul as one of the greatest songs of the era, with an equally moving music video. I had the incredible privilege of interviewing Midge Ure about this classic composition in depth recently. What follows is the story of Vienna, straight from Midge. And just an FYI, Midge Ure would go on to record 2 more great albums with Ultravox, including Quartet, including producing on that record with Beatles genius producer George Martin. Pretty cool. Midge Ure would go on to his solo career and to produce many bands, including Steve Harley, Skids, and Peter Godwin. He reformed the classic lineup of Ultravox, I believe that was in 2008, and he performed reunion shows in the years that were following. As we go into this interview, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses that I wear every day. Here's the deal. These are my favorite frames that I've ever owned, that I've ever worn. At Zenni.com, just like I've done, you can customize your eyewear with a prescription lens or a non-prescription lens. If you just want that distinct look or a vivid color or a particular style of lens, check it out today at Zenni.com. Here is Midge Ure with the story behind Vienna. Talk about a mind-blowing single, Cinema of the Mind. When this album came out, you guys, of course, released Sleepwalk, and that went to number 29 on the UK charts. And then you released Passing Strangers, and that didn't chart. Vienna came out. It's been voted this, but I'll say this. It's the greatest number 2 single in the history of the UK charts. There's no question about that. I'm sure you were okay with Woman by John Lennon, but for 3 weeks for it to be Shut Up Your Face. I mean, a novelty song that was just a throwaway song. It just annoyed people.
It's a nicer place. Shut up your face. Shut up my face.
It probably annoyed people more than it annoyed us. You've got to remember, as you quite rightly pointed out, this was the first album that I had done with Ultravox. And to get any chart success, with any of the tracks was a great thing. But then when Vienna came out and just captured people's imagination, to get to number 2 was outstanding for us.
The fact that this odd piece of music, this electronic ballads with a viola solo in it. Just kind of transformed people. It changed everything. And it changed the band, so we were elevated into a much higher status.
We didn't know what to make of it because it elevated us from playing small clubs into much larger venues, much larger audience. And the whole point of having a hit single is to point people towards the album. We want people to hear the body of work, not just the one track. And that's exactly what it did. So for us, the fact that a novelty record kind of kept us off, it was kind of annoying, but, what brats would we be if we were standing there sulking because we only got to number 2? And had it gone to number 1, we wouldn't be talking about it now.
It outsold both of those records combined and became the 5th biggest song of that year and number 1 all over Europe and also single of the year at the Brit Awards. And it was given an honorary number 1 by the OCC. I saw that.
It was, yeah. And the BBC radio did a vote a few years ago to vote for the track that should have been number 1 that wasn't. And Vienna, fantastic. It's lovely.
It's a game changer song. You talk about songs, there are songs that are hits and they're catchy, but then there are songs that change the way that you view the world. I mean, that just shake you up. That's one of those songs. How did it come about?
I think naivety's got a lot to do with it, and I'm not being coy, but I think it really has. I think when you're young, you attempt things that you wouldn't even dream of doing later on in life. And we really didn't care what people kind of thought of us. We wanted to be experimental. We wanted to dabble with atmospheres and ambiences. Billy Curry, our keyboard player, our viola keyboard player, is a classically trained musician. So a lot of that classical training came out in the music that we did. But I'm from the other end of the spectrum. I'm from the kind of pop rock end of things. So when we kind of met in the middle, this sound came out that nobody else was making. It was very unique. But naivety drove us to do that. I remember at the time we were tired of the music industry in the UK and we wanted to be signed to an American label. And an A&R guy flew across from America and sat in the rehearsal studio for 3 days while we wrote that song. So he saw it from the very conception of the thing, you know, from just walking in saying, I've got this line in my head that says, it means nothing to me, oh Vienna.
This means nothing to me. Oh, Vienna.
To the piano part, to the whole thing being constructed, to how it sounded exactly on the record, and then he didn't sign us. But every band's got a story like that, haven't they, you know?
Well, let's talk about recording it, because this, the grand piano and the verse and the chorus and the viola in the middle and solid synth that came from the Mini Moog. I love to talk about the instruments, the Roland CR78 drum machine. This was a new era for music. As 79 was turning over to 80 and 81. It really opened up the door for synth pop and new wave and romantics, post-punk, whatever they want to call it. But tell me about that.
It was, you look at what we had back then, it may have been perceived as cutting edge stuff. It was incredibly basic, the equipment we had. We were a rock band who used traditional rock instrumentation as well as, you know, the violin or viola, because Billy's a classically trained violinist. And this new technology, you know, the electronics, the synthesizers, the drum machines. But none of the equipment could talk to itself, could talk to each other. The drum machine wouldn't connect with the Mini Moog, and the Mini Moog wouldn't connect with the ERP or whatever.
And the Elka string.
It was pre-MIDI, you know, which is the musical instrument digital interface, which is the method that people use now to connect different machines and make them lock together. Well, none of that worked. So we had 3 weeks to make this entire album. And we went in with the very, very basic equipment we had. The key to getting this right was rehearse it to death. We wrote it in rehearsal rooms. We arranged it, so the arrangements that we finished up with were exactly what ended up on the album. So, and we had toured some of the newer material, toured it live, which was a logistical, technical nightmare. So when it came to recording, I really wanted to work with Conny Plank, the German record producer, who had done the last album that Ultravox had done prior to me joining, an album called Systems of Romance. And Conny Plank had worked with, you know, Noy and Can and Kraftwerk. And Eno and Bowie and, you know, you name it. He was the guy, he was the electronics guy. So because we had this stuff fairly well arranged and organised, we had to then put on our engineering hats and figure out, okay, if we're doing something where Chris, the bass player, is playing a running Mini Moog thing, like all stood still, you know, you do it with timed echoes, so you hit one note and it goes dug-gag. So you go dug-gag. So that gives you a tempo that's fairly rigid, you know, unless you mess up. But that's got to be played live with a drum kit. So as you're doing the basic take, if Chris screws up one of the notes, you have to stop, go all the way back to the beginning, do it again until you get it a clean one all the way through. Because the drums are playing in time with the synth, which is playing in time with the drums, but they're not connected. They're not, you know, you can't just go back and go, I'll just drop in here. There's nothing to drop into. You can't do it. Technically, it was a bit of a nightmare, but because we were all kind of quasi-boffins, we figured it all out. The slowdown in Vienna, the viola solo, violin solo. The violin solo speeds up, all picks up and it double times it. And then it slows right down, and there was no way it could slow it right down and get back to the original tempo.
This means anything to me.
In time for the timed dig-gig. So we had to cut the master tape, the 24-track recording tape, and then stop the song, and then go back and set the tempo again for the second half of the song, record the second half of the song, and then Connie edited the master tape together. So you get the slow down straight into the it just took a little bit of thought, that's all. But it was incredibly creative. You know, given a small amount of technology to play with, you had to be very, very open and creative about what you're going to do with it. And that was the result.
It's like new wave music meets 19th century romantic. Now, is there any truth to this? I wanted to ask you about the lyric, "It means nothing to me," that you didn't want it to sound too overtly 19th century. They were trying to make this symphonic thing, and you said, "Well, it means nothing to me." And he said, "Well, then sing that line." Is that true?
I've
read that.
I've read that as well, and I don't think it's true. I think Warren said that. It's quite possible that I did say that, but I seem to remember walking into the rehearsal room one day. We spent most of our lives in the rehearsal room writing and creating, and walked in one day, and all I had in my head was, "This means nothing to me, oh Vienna." That was it. It was a classic example of all four musicians putting in key things. You took any of those elements out, it would fall apart. So Warren with a boom, 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 you know. Chris with a dug, you know, that heartbeat synth thing. Billy with a da 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 ding. Very classical-esque piano, and me with this melody in my head. And it was a perfect example of a band really coming together in its very, very early stages, and just something magic happening.
I read it was inspired by the Walker Brothers, The Electrician. Is that true?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Not for me. Certainly not for me.
Yeah, that 60s crooner thing. I mean, that Bowie-esque crooning vocal thing, a style, a very, very stylistic thing, was big in the 80s. You know, we were kind of, you know, influenced by what went on in the 60s, who were influenced by what went on in the 40s and 50s. Right. You know, from over here, from the crooners here, from the Sinatras and the Tony Bennett's and all of that. So it filtered its way right through all the generations, and it still influences people today.
It does. I can hear Vienna in Lord Royals.
My friends and I, we've cracked the code.
There's the beat there, and
right.
how she comes in to sing the lyrics. That is very much like the beginning of Vienna.
A man in the dark in a picture frame.
Well, you know, it's one of those songs that you said was a bit of a game changer. It opened the doors to let people experiment and try things. And it's usually the oddities in music. History shows you that. If you look back, it's the Bohemian Rhapsodies or the Kate Bush's Wuthering Heights or the real left field things that make the transition and make it okay to do stuff like that.
Right.
So.
And it's also, interestingly enough, of course, the Third Man influenced as well, the movie.
Yeah, subliminally, yeah. When we did the video for Vienna, I already had the images in my head and, cropping the screen top and bottom, shooting it on 16mm film rather than video. We had all these parameters. We knew exactly what we wanted graphically. And of course, once we made the video, I re-saw The Third Man and thought, oops, that's where it came from then. That's just slipped in there when I was a kid. And I hadn't crossed my mind that The Third Man was all set in Vienna.
I never knew the old Vienna before the war with its Strauss music.
And all that imagery and all that, the wet cobbles and the black and white, the film noir. All of that stuff. It's obviously stuff that's just been fed in over the years, and it's given the opportunity. It's all popped out on that one little platform.
Reissued in 93, recharted at number 13. I want to ask you about some of the uses in pop culture, because since we last talked, how they used it on the Americans was incredible. That must have meant something to you. Did you see that?
I did see it, yeah. I wasn't expecting it, I have to say. I saw, all of a sudden, there was a big flurry in social media. Have you seen this? This is amazing. You know, Ultravox getting played on the American. But since then, of course, it's been used in 13 Reasons Why. The American Crime Story, the assassination of Gianni Versace, which they used it brilliantly, I thought. I mean, it's not a song that should be associated with hideous deeds, but The way they used it in that was they used it like soundtrack music. No dialogue, and they played 4 minutes of the song or whatever it was. The action happened using that as the atmosphere. And I thought that was such a cool way of using the song.
Oh, yeah.
It was great.
Professor Grasinko listening to it on Doctor Who clear back in the day.
That's right.
As part of his Walkman, right?
It's funny, it's the things that you don't see coming that tend to cause most of a furore.
Vienna. Have I interrupted something?
I was in Australia, I arrived in Australia, and next morning I'm looking at my Twitter feed going, Doctor Who? What are you talking about? I had no idea it was in there. And the fact that Ultravox were written into the scene, that you think, okay, they mentioned Ultravox. How cool is that?
It recharted in '93.
It did.
You know?
It did. And it's one of those things that it's still, today when you hear it on the radio, it still sounds reasonably fresh, considering it's, 35 years old.
Hey, thanks for watching. Leave us a comment about this masterpiece of 80s synth pop, Vienna. And Midge Ure, tell us your memories of this song, your feelings about this song. If you like our content, we definitely invite you to become a subscriber in our community. To get Ultravox's greatest music, click on our links, and don't forget to check us out on Patreon. Help us keep the music alive. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends. Stay safe out there.